The morning sun touched the tall glass windows of Arlen's mansion, but inside, the atmosphere was cold, heavy, and tense. Everyone who worked there walked fast, talked less, and never made eye contact with their boss. They all had the same fear: the man who never kept an assistant for more than a few days. Arlen was a millionaire, young, successful, and known for his sharp mind. But he was also known for something else: his temper. Assistants came in smiling and confident but left the mansion shaking or crying. Some stayed 3 days. Some stayed 3 hours. A few didn't even survive one morning. His rules were strict, strange, and sometimes impossible to understand. People believed Arlen was impossible to work with, maybe even impossible to please. But on this special Monday morning, something unusual was about to happen. Something no one expected. Something that would start a war not with weapons, but with emotions, secrets, and patience. Her name was Myra. She arrived in a simple outfit, holding a small notebook and a bag that looked almost empty. She had no makeup, no fancy style, no powerful background. She was an ordinary girl with a calm face and eyes that carried pain she never talked about. She needed this job not for comfort, not for luxury, but for her sick brother, who was waiting in a hospital bed. The staff looked at her with sad eyes. "She won't survive a day," one whispered. "Poor girl, she doesn't know what's coming," another said. But Myra didn't react. She kept walking, slowly and quietly, like someone who had nothing left to lose. When she reached the main office, Arlen was already inside, typing fast on his laptop with his usual cold expression. He didn't look at her. He didn't welcome her. He simply said in a flat voice, "You're late." Myra checked the clock. She was actually 5 minutes early. But she stayed silent. She didn't complain. Arlen continued without lifting his head. "Rule 1, don't speak unless I ask. Rule 2, don't question my decisions. Rule 3, keep up with my speed. If you fail, you leave immediately. Do you understand?" Myra nodded. Arlen finally looked up, and this was the first moment of the unexpected war. He expected fear. He expected nerves. But instead, he saw calm. Not fake calm. Real calm. Something about her expression annoyed him. Not because she was disrespectful, but because she didn't react the way other assistants did. She didn't shrink. She didn't look scared. She just stood there quietly, like she had already survived something worse. Arlen pushed a long list of tasks toward her. "Finish all this in 2 hours." Myra looked at the list. It was long, very long. Almost impossible to finish in 2 hours. But she said nothing. She walked to the next table and started working. Arlen watched her secretly from his office window. He expected her to panic. To make mistakes. To run around asking questions. But she didn't. She moved fast, but not desperately. She organized, typed, checked, and arranged everything with surprising focus. 1 hour later, she knocked on Arlen's door and placed the completed file on his desk. "It's done," she said softly. Arlen didn't believe her. He opened the file, searching for mistakes. Searching for flaws. Searching for anything to prove she wasn't capable. But the work was clean. Simple, but clean. He closed the file slowly. "Who trained you?" he asked. "No one," she replied. Her voice was steady, humble, and honest. Arlen didn't like it. Something inside him felt challenged. For years, assistants left because they couldn't handle him. But this girl. She wasn't fighting him. She wasn't scared of him. She was not even trying to impress him. She was simply surviving. And that made him uncomfortable. "Follow me," Arlen said sharply. He walked fast through the mansion hallways, expecting her to stay behind. But Myra walked with the same pace, without losing rhythm. Arlen opened the door to a messy storage room filled with documents, old boxes, and papers everywhere. "Organize this. It will take the whole day," he said. Myra took one look at the mess. It was a disaster. But she nodded and got to work. Hours passed. Staff members peeked inside, expecting to see her frustrated or crying. But Myra was quiet, steady, and focused. She knew this chaos was nothing compared to the chaos inside her own life. By evening, the room looked transformed. Boxes stacked neatly. Files arranged perfectly. Dust cleaned. Everything in order. Arlen stood there in silence, staring at the room. No assistant had ever managed to organize it. Some didn't even try. "How did you finish this?" he asked. Myra looked at him and replied gently. "When life is messy, you learn how to clean things fast." Arlen felt something strange, irritation mixed with curiosity. This girl was different. Too different. And that's when the first sign of the unexpected war appeared in his mind. She might last longer than the others, and that scared him. Because if she stayed, she might see things he didn't want anyone to see. The war had begun quietly, silently, with no one even realizing it. But one thing was now clear. Myra was not like the others, and Arlen was not ready for her. The next morning, the mansion felt different. It was quiet, but not the normal quiet. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm. The staff kept whispering about Myra. She survived the first day. No one survives the first day. Maybe she is lucky. But deep inside, everyone knew it wasn't luck. Something about her had already disturbed the usual balance of the mansion. Myra walked into the office early, this time 10 minutes before time. Arlen was already there, sitting at his desk, staring at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "You're early," he said. "Yes," Myra answered softly. Arlen didn't like simple answers. He liked explanations. But she never gave more than needed. He pushed a folder toward her. "These are financial summaries. I want them rechecked, corrected, and organized. Today." Myra opened the folder. There were hundreds of pages. Numbers everywhere. Errors hiding between lines. Anyone else would panic. But Myra only nodded and carried the folder out. Arlen watched her as she left. Why wasn't she scared? Why didn't she ask questions? Why did her silence feel louder than any argument? He shook his head and returned to work, but he found himself checking the hallway again and again, wondering how she was managing. Myra's calm was breaking him. Myra took a seat in the smaller office room. She began sorting the pages, scanning the numbers carefully. Her fingers moved fast, her eyes focused. Behind her calm face, her mind whispered painful reminders. "You need this job. Your brother needs his medicine. You cannot fail." Every minute mattered. Hours passed. She didn't take a break. She didn't drink water. She didn't relax her shoulders. At lunchtime, the house cook came and whispered, "You can eat. Boss won't check now." Myra smiled gently. "I'll eat after this." The cook shook his head. "No one works like this here. They all break." But Myra didn't break. She finished the task faster than anyone expected. By 2 p.m., she walked into Arlen's office. He didn't look up. "Leave the report on the table." "I corrected everything," she said. "And found 2 calculation mistakes in last month's budget." Arlen froze. "What did you say?" He slowly lifted his head as if he heard something impossible. She placed the corrected sheets in front of him. He scanned them quickly. And there they were, the mistakes his finance team had missed. Mistakes that could cost him thousands. "How did you find this?" he asked, confused. Myra shrugged lightly. It was obvious, once I looked closely. Arlen leaned back in his chair. This was not normal. No assistant ever did more than he asked. No one dared touch past reports. No one dared correct anything. But she did. That was when the first small crack appeared inside Arlen's icy heart, a tiny break he didn't notice yet. The mansion's dark corners. Later that evening, Arlen called her again. I need you to bring files from the West Wing. The West Wing was the oldest part of the mansion. Dark hallways. No lights in some corners. Doors that creaked like they were tired of being touched. Most staff refused to go there after sunset. They believed the place held bad memories, or secrets. Myra walked alone with a small flashlight. The corridor was silent except for her light footsteps. But as she walked deeper, she heard something strange. A soft, muffled sound. Like someone trying not to cry. She froze. The sound came from a door slightly open. Room 12B. She slowly pushed the door. Inside was an old, dusty room with covered furniture. No one was there. But the crying sound continued, faint, like a memory replaying itself. Myra stepped back, confused. Was it her imagination? Or something else? She found the files Arlen needed and returned to his office. But this time, she entered with a thoughtful face. Arlen noticed instantly. What happened? He asked. Nothing, she replied quickly. He frowned. He could read people very easily. He could sense fear, weakness, lies. Myra wasn't lying. But something bothered her. You heard something in the West Wing? Arlen asked sharply. She looked at him in surprise. How did you? Before she finished, Arlen stood up, walked past her, and closed the door behind them. Don't go there again at night, he said. His voice was low, almost protective. Why? Myra asked. That area is restricted. Because of the sound, she asked again. Arlen turned slowly. That question hit him like a punch. But he hid the reaction. There is no sound, he said firmly. Stick to your work. But for the first time, Myra saw something in his eyes. Not anger. Not coldness. Something else. Pain. Cracks turning into questions. That night, after Myra left, Arlen walked into the West Wing alone. He stopped in front of the same door, room 12B. He placed his hand on the wooden frame and closed his eyes. Myra heard it, he whispered to himself. The crying sound. The sound he had tried to forget. The sound he buried deep inside these walls. He locked the room again, but he knew that something had changed. Myra's presence had started touching things he wanted untouched. She had lasted 2 days longer than most. And in just 2 days, she had seen a piece of his hidden world. The silent war between them was growing. But the real battle was inside Arlen. A battle with his own past. And Myra. Myra had just stepped into it, without even trying. The mansion was quiet again, but tonight, the silence felt heavier. Shadows stretched across the marble floors, and the wind outside made the windows rattle slightly. Myra was finishing her tasks in the small office when she noticed something strange. A door at the far end of the mansion was slightly ajar. She had never seen it open before. It was the same door Arlen had strictly forbidden her to enter the West Wing's locked room, room 12B. Her heart skipped a beat. She remembered the muffled sound she had heard the night before, the faint crying that seemed almost alive. Curiosity, sharp and unyielding, pushed her forward. But she stopped herself. No. I'm here to work. Not to snoop. Myra turned back to her work, trying to ignore the thoughts swirling in her mind. But the sound of her own heartbeat was louder than the ticking clock. A strange encounter. Later that evening, Arlen appeared at the office door. His usual calm, cold expression was there, but Myra noticed a flicker of something else: unease. "You're still here?" he asked, in a voice that was sharper than usual. "Yes, sir. Just finishing the reports," she replied. He nodded slowly and walked past her. Then, without looking back, he said, "Leave everything for tomorrow. You can go." Myra gathered her things and stepped into the hallway. The mansion felt different tonight. The air was heavy, almost suffocating. She walked past the forbidden door and froze again. This time, the door was wide open. A chill ran down her spine. She didn't move closer. Something told her this was not a room she should enter. Yet, the faint, sorrowful sound of crying drifted toward her, like a whisper from the past. The first secret. The next day, Myra noticed Arlen's unusual behavior. He was quieter than usual, moving through the mansion with a sharp edge to his movements. His assistants were nervous, they whispered behind his back about how strange he was acting. Myra, however, stayed focused on her work. But her mind wandered to room 12B. Why did he hide it? Why was it off limits? And why had she heard crying from there? During lunch, she accidentally spilled some water on the floor. Arlen walked in just as she was cleaning it up. Normally, he would have shouted. Normally, he would have lost his temper. But today, he didn't. Instead, he paused and looked at her. The moment lingered. Something in his expression softened, a flicker of surprise, of recognition. "You have patience," he muttered, almost to himself. Myra looked up, unsure how to respond. She had always been patient. Patience wasn't a choice, it was survival. Arlen turned back to his office, closing the door behind him. Myra felt the first hint of a change. Something inside him was shifting, but she didn't know what. Nightfall and the forbidden room. That evening, Myra was still working late. The mansion was darker than usual, with most of the lights turned off. Only the small desk lamp beside her gave a soft glow. But she couldn't focus. Her mind kept returning to the locked room. The crying. The locked door. The secrets. Without thinking, she stood up and walked toward the west wing. The hallway was colder here, and the shadows seemed to stretch farther. As she approached the forbidden door, she hesitated. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the handle. Then, a voice from behind froze her in place. "Myra." She turned sharply. Arlen stood there, tall, dark, and imposing as always. But this time, his expression was not anger. It was caution. "You should not be here," he said quietly, almost like a warning. I just wanted to understand," Myra said softly, her voice shaking a little. Arlen's eyes studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he stepped aside. "Come in," he said, in a low voice. Inside the locked room. The room was dark and dusty. Covered furniture and old papers were scattered across the floor. But at the far corner, Myra noticed a small crib. A sense of shock ran through her. This was no ordinary storage room. Something personal, something tragic, was hidden here. Arlen stepped in behind her, his presence heavy. He didn't speak, but Myra felt his tension. Who is this for?" she asked, pointing to the crib. He looked down, his face shadowed in sorrow. For the first time, he spoke softly, almost whispering. My family. They are gone. I can't let anyone see this." Myra understood instantly that she had entered a part of his life no one was supposed to see. Her heart ached, not just for the mystery, but for the pain in Arlen's eyes. She said nothing, just nodded. Sometimes silence was louder than words. For the first time, Arlen didn't hide his emotions. He didn't try to appear cold or strong. And Myra, she didn't flinch. That night, she left the room with a quiet promise in her heart to survive, to understand, and maybe, to help. A new tension begins. As Myra returned to her small office, she realized something important. This job was not just about work. It was about secrets. It was about pain. And she had already stepped into the most hidden part of Arlen's life. The silent cracks in his icy personality were growing. And Myra, without realizing it, was the first person to notice them. For the first time, the mansion felt alive in a different way, not just with fear, but with unspoken tension. And somewhere deep in the mansion's heart, Arlen realized something he had never thought possible. Myra was not like the others. And he didn't know if he was ready for that. The following morning, the mansion felt heavier than usual. Even the staff sensed it. Something in the air had changed. It wasn't fear. It was anticipation, the kind that prickled at the skin and made hearts beat faster. Myra walked into the office, carrying her usual calm, quiet confidence. But today, she felt the weight of curiosity pressing down on her. Room 12B. The crib. The crying. The shadows that clung to Arlen like a second skin. She couldn't stop thinking about them. Her work began as usual, checking files and organizing documents. But every few minutes, her mind drifted to Arlen. He had been quieter the past 2 days. Not absent. Not cold. But different. Softer. The unexpected invitation. Around midday, Arlen called her into his office. Myra's heart skipped a beat. No one ever spent time alone with him willingly. Usually, assistants were rushed in and rushed out, or worse, scolded. "Sit," he said simply, motioning to a chair across from his desk. Myra sat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She noticed the tension in the room. Arlen didn't speak immediately. He stared at the papers in front of him, but his thoughts were clearly elsewhere. Finally, he looked up, eyes dark yet vulnerable. "You've seen room 12B, he said quietly. Myra's pulse raced. She didn't want to lie, but she didn't want to make him angry either. "Yes. I did," she admitted softly. Arlen's gaze pierced her. There was no anger. Only recognition. And a hint of relief. "You're the first assistant who didn't run away. The first one who didn't scream or cry or lie," he said. Myra felt a strange warmth. It wasn't praise. It was trust. The pain he hid. Then, he did something unexpected. He spoke not in his usual sharp tone, not in his cold, professional voice. He spoke with pain. "My wife, my baby, they died years ago," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "A car crash. I was supposed to protect them. I failed." Myra's breath caught. She had guessed there was sadness behind his coldness, but hearing it was different. "Real. I pushed everyone away after that," he continued. "Assistants, friends, anyone who came close. I couldn't risk feeling that loss again. I became this." He gestured at himself, the millionaire, the cold, unapproachable man everyone feared. Myra stayed silent, letting him speak. Sometimes, silence was the only answer that mattered. "I've hidden this room, the crib, the memories, because I couldn't face anyone," Arlen said, his voice breaking slightly. "And you saw it?" Myra met his eyes. Not with pity. Not with fear. But with understanding. "I didn't run away," she said softly. "I work. I listen. I notice. That's all." Arlen studied her for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes briefly. The first real connection. For the first time, Myra saw Arlen not as a millionaire, not as a boss, not as a storm to survive, but as a human being. Broken. hurt, vulnerable. And for the first time, Arlen allowed himself to be seen. "You're the first person to see me like this," he admitted, his voice low. "And the first assistant who stayed, even when it was hard." Myra nodded. "I didn't run away because I need this job. And I saw that you're not just scary. You're human." Arlen's expression softened, a shadow of a smile appeared, almost imperceptible but real. A shift in power. The tension between them changed. The silent war that had begun days ago shifted into a subtle understanding. Arlen didn't need to test her constantly anymore. He didn't need to hide every detail. Myra didn't need to fear every word, every glance. But the mansion still held its secrets. The night would still bring shadows. Room 12B would remain locked, but now, a bridge of trust had begun. Arlen looked at her carefully. "Tomorrow, I will show you something else. Something no assistant has ever seen." Myra's heart raced, a mix of curiosity and apprehension. She had survived his first challenges. She had seen his pain. And now, she was about to step even deeper into his world. "I'm ready," she said simply. Arlen studied her again. There was admiration in his eyes, quiet, unspoken, and uncomfortable even for him. "Good," he said finally. "Because nothing will ever be simple here. Not for me. Not for you. And not for anyone who stays in this mansion." A moment of calm before the storm. That evening, Myra walked back to her small room. Her mind was racing with thoughts. She had seen his pain. She had connected, in some small way, to the man no one could survive working for. And yet, she felt something dangerous stirring. She had learned one truth already: this job was not just about work. It was about understanding secrets. It was about surviving emotion. It was about facing shadows. And the real test was yet to come. Myra lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling both fear and determination. She knew the next day would change everything. Room 12B was just the beginning. And Arlen's trust, fragile as it was, would be the key to surviving what was coming. The mansion felt different that morning. No one could explain it. Not the staff, not even Arlen. There was tension in the air, yes, but also expectation. Something was about to happen that no one had seen before. Myra walked into the office quietly, holding her notebook and bag. Her calm, steady presence had already begun to unsettle the usual rhythm of the mansion. Every assistant before her had cracked under Arlen's strict rules, his sharp temper, and the endless challenges. But not Myra. She had survived days of impossible tasks. She had seen his secret room, the crib, the pain he hid behind cold eyes. And she had survived the first month, something no assistant had ever done. The final test. Arlen entered the office quietly, unusually quiet. Normally, he would have stormed in with commands and sharp questions. But today, he just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching Myra work. "Bring all the reports from the West Wing," he said finally, his voice softer than usual. Myra froze slightly. The West Wing still carried shadows. And the locked room, room 12B, had revealed a truth no one else knew. But she didn't hesitate. She gathered the files and moved quickly and efficiently, her steps confident. When she returned, Arlen scanned her work carefully. He expected mistakes. He expected excuses. He expected failure. But there were none. Every report was perfect. Every file organized. Every number corrected. Arlen's jaw tightened. Myra had done more than survive, she had excelled. The shock. He called all the staff into the main hall. Everyone assumed it was another storm, another assistant being fired or scolded. But instead, Arlen said calmly, "Everyone, this is the first time in my career that an assistant has survived a full month, and not just survived. She has thrived. She has done work no one else could. She has earned my trust. Myra stood quietly, her heart racing. The staff stared in disbelief. Some whispered, some gasped. No one could believe it. Arlen walked toward her. His expression was serious, but for the first time, there was a hint of respect. "You are now my permanent assistant," he said. "And I trust you more than anyone else here." Myra's eyes widened. Her hands trembled slightly. This was more than a job. This was a victory not just for her, but for everything she had endured to reach this point. A new understanding. Later, when the hall emptied, Arlen called Myra back into his office. "I want you to know something," he said. "You didn't just survive the mansion. You survived me. And that is rare." Myra smiled softly, understanding the weight of his words. She had seen his pain, his secrets, his past. And instead of fear, she had faced them calmly. She had given him something no one else had, patience and understanding. Arlen, for his part, had been shocked. Shocked that someone could stay, that someone could connect without fear, that someone could make him feel human again. For the first time, he smiled fully, a rare, unguarded smile. The unexpected turn. But even as Myra celebrated silently inside her mind, Arlen's expression shifted. His eyes grew serious again. "Tomorrow," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I will show you something else. Something no assistant has ever seen." Myra's heart raced. She had survived the first month. She had faced his challenges and learned his secrets. But whatever he planned next, she knew the story was far from over. The mansion was quiet once more, but the air buzzed with possibilities. Myra had conquered the first battle. Arlen, the millionaire who scared everyone, had been shocked not just by her skills, but by her courage, patience, and heart. And in that moment, both of them realized, this was just the beginning. The cliffhanger. Myra left the office that night, walking down the long, dimly lit hallways of the mansion. Room 12B, the West Wing, the locked doors, everything seemed calmer, but she knew the real test was yet to come. She had survived the impossible. She had earned trust. She had even glimpsed humanity in the man everyone feared. But tomorrow, Arlen had promised something new. Something that would test her in ways she could not imagine. And as she looked out of the mansion window at the dark sky, she realized, her life, her brother's future, and her own destiny were all tied to this man. And Arlen, for the first time, realized something he had never admitted to anyone: Myra was different. She wasn't leaving. And he didn't know if he wanted her to. The silent war had ended. The real journey was just beginning.